It's a tricky one because the simplified formula for the attraction due to gravity, it works great on a planetary scale, because the distances between them are huge, whereas when you're actually stood on the surface of the attracting body, where actually is the attraction coming from? In the model that I've done, in the time of the dinosaurs, you can actually place the points of attraction to maybe 1,000 kilometres deep or 600 kilometres deep.
For starters, though I have thousands of rock art images, I sent him just one, and it was entirely on the basis of intuition. I had come to believe that this was one of the purest representations of that discharge form. As Tony recounts it, the moment he saw this, he knew that his life was changed.
What the UFOs are doing to us, to global society, is they are eroding faith in science by casting directly in the path of science a kind of gauntlet, a challenge. Crack this, almost as though the cosmic giggle had shown up at the bachelor party of science to spoil the bash. It's interesting, you see, that if you take the broad world of the so-called mysteries, parapsychological, shamanic, extraterrestrial, so forth, and hypothesize another spatial dimension, one more spatial dimension, then suddenly all these mysteries become trivial.
But there's a conflict in the heart of science between science as a method of inquiry based on reason, evidence, hypothesis, and collective investigation, and science as a belief system or a worldview. And unfortunately, the worldview aspect of science has come to inhibit and constrict the free inquiry, which is the very lifeblood of the scientific endeavor.
Seeking truths about the world, I heard lots of interesting truths from so-called spiritual people, but then saw their lives never match their truths. And then, as I started to get older, realized that science was where I would go find my truths about life. And so I was not a spiritual person at all, got into the science, and was, of course, ingrained with the conventional beliefs of Darwinian biology and genes control life and genetic automatons, biochemical machines, all that kind of stuff. And the beautiful part about my stem cell research was, as I started to do this and I was cloning genetically identical cells, I started to realize that if I would take these genetically identical cells and put them into separate petri dishes and then change the environment in those dishes, that in one dish they will form muscle, in another dish they'll form bone, and yet in a third dish they would form fat by changing the conditions. You stop for a second and realize, well wait, they were all genetically identical. So what is it that controlled why they became muscle or bone or fat? And the answer was very obvious. It was like, information from the environment.
The American Psychological Association, people who deal with mental problems, stress, all that sort of thing, as far as I know, have not written books on the effects of environment upon behavior and criticizing the way government operates. It's unsane, and I've never found them to talk about government that way. Maybe they'd lose appropriations if they did, but I don't know whether they're interested in appropriations or understanding human behavior. I know of no group of psychologists that advocated social change in order to avoid most stresses and most of the problems that people have. I've never known neurologists that laid out a plan for informing people with better methods of evaluation so that they don't have the stresses they have. Therefore, all their books seem to be maps of the brain and what region of the brain controls what pattern of behavior, which is all right, and that anatomically, but does not describe or alleviate problems.
I've been busy all my life working on solutions of problems. I'm a social engineer, and I try to improve the world I live in. Social engineer is one who concerns himself with social phenomena. What makes people the way they are? What are the conditions responsible for human behavior? And how can society be rearranged to function with minimum pain and war, poverty, hunger, unemployment? How can we eliminate that? This is what a social engineer tries to minimize. Oh, I did a lot of the groundwork to try to find out what it is that shapes human behavior. I try to remove the conditions that produce serial killers, gangsters, thieves, murderers. I try to remove the conditions responsible for aberrant behavior. My partner is Roxanne Meadows. She works with me, and this is what we set out to build, a research center here to try to arrive at the best ways for changing society in the shortest time possible. Well, we try to build models of a city system and try to modify it and bring it down and simplify it so that it can be built all over the world. And we try to work out systems in communication for changing people in the shortest possible time, changing their mental set and their values. The Venus Project is a method of attaining sustainability for all people by giving them pointers such as we must declare the earth as a common heritage of all the world's people. We must remove all the artificial boundaries that separate people. We must make things available to people without money. We must eliminate social elitism, technical or otherwise. So I said, let's take care of everybody, the inventors, the designers, the engineers, and the people themselves. Make things available to them, and that will change their behavior. We're working in the wrong direction, and all over the world, societies are collapsing, going bankrupt, not able to work things out because they use political methods, which was good, I said, 100 years ago, but they do not work today. So they're failing all over the world. People have to lose their homes, their jobs, and they have to lose confidence in the people they elected. Once that happens, they are open to new ideas. Oh, you'll never see that, not in 1,000 years. You're a dreamer, you're a utopian, you're a goddamn communist, or you're this or that. I believe all things change. Utopia is an impossible concept. It assumes that you can design a city that's good for all time. You can't do that. Everything changes. That's the only constant in nature, and that's change. I don't believe that the cities of the future will be fixed. They'll undergo changes continuously. I do not believe there are any final frontiers. I believe that men and women will continue to invent newer and better systems, and there's no limit to what humans can do. The pain of watching the way the world is moving and the directions of war and human suffering and the loss of lives and the destroying of cities, all of that motivates me to try to do a better job than what politicians are trying to accomplish without knowledge. If enough people work at what I talk about, I believe we can change the world. If they do nothing, nothing will happen. I can't accept the world as it is today, so I do everything I can to build a world of sustainability for all people, not any single nation. I don't hope to gain anything. I just hope to do the best I can, and whatever happens, happens.
And the world impoverishes itself by spending $1 trillion a year on preparations for war, and by employing perhaps half the scientists and high technologists on the planet in military endeavors. How would we explain all this to a dispassionate extraterrestrial observer? What account would we give of our stewardship of the planet Earth? We have heard the rationales offered by the superpowers. We know who speaks for the nations, but who speaks for the human species? Who speaks for Earth? From an extraterrestrial perspective, our global civilization is clearly on the edge of failure in the most important task it faces, preserving the lives and well-being of its citizens and the future habitability of the planet. But if we're willing to live with the growing likelihood of nuclear war, shouldn't we also be willing to explore vigorously every possible means to prevent nuclear war? Shouldn't we consider in every nation major changes in the traditional ways of doing things, a fundamental restructuring of economic, political, social, and religious institutions? We've reached a point where there can be no more special interests or special cases. Nuclear arms threaten every person on the Earth. Fundamental changes in society are sometimes labeled impractical or contrary to human nature, as if nuclear war were practical, or as if there were only one human nature. But fundamental changes can clearly be made. We're surrounded by them. In the last 2 centuries, abject slavery, which was with us for thousands of years, has almost entirely been eliminated in a stirring worldwide revolution. Women, systematically mistreated for millennia, are gradually gaining the political and economic power traditionally denied to them. And some wars of aggression have recently been stopped or curtailed because of a revulsion felt by the people in the aggressor nations. The old appeals to racial, sexual, and religious chauvinism and to rabid nationalist fervor are beginning not to work. A new consciousness is developing which sees the Earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed. We are one planet.